Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, John McAdams here. Welcome to episode 316 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. Tyler Freel is back on the show again today to talk about Dall sheep hunting with us. Now, Tyler has lived in Alaska for a long time, and he has done a lot of sheep hunting since he's lived up there. In this episode, we talk about everything Dall sheep hunting. We talk about how and where to hunt Dall sheep, descriptions about what constitutes a legal ram, how a sheep hunt is often conducted, what time of year you go sheep hunting, how Dall sheep taste, and of course, what cartridges and bullets are best suited for and most commonly used for hunting Dall sheep up in the part of the world where they live. Now, this is Tyler's second time coming on the podcast. He was on the show back in episode 282. We talked about his successful grizzly bear hunt in 2023 with a 6.5 Creedmoor. Awesome episode. Be sure you check out that one to learn more about that subject. But right now, we're going to dive into talking about Dall sheep hunting with Tyler Freel. All right, well, Tyler, it is a pleasure having you back on the show with us again today. Like I was just saying, you were back on episode 282 to talk about that grizzly you shot with the 6.5 Creedmoor. Great episode. I really enjoyed that. So did the audience. We'll talk about hunting in Alaska today, maybe about the 6.5 Creedmoor a little bit today, but not grizzly and the 6.5 Creedmoor in the same interview. So it's good to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. Yeah, it was a fun conversation. I always like talking about this kind of stuff.
Well, so we're talking about Dall sheep today, which is another one of those really iconic Alaska species up there with moose and with the grizzly and the brown bear and whatnot. I think a lot of people have an idea that they know what a Dall sheep is, a sheep, and they live in the mountains, but that's really about all they know about them. Can you tell us just a little bit about Dall sheep, where they live, how big a big ram gets, that sort of thing?
Yeah. Well, they're, like you mentioned, Alaska is the only native sheep species to Alaska, and depending on how far you want to go back, theories are that they came over across the land bridge from Russia and Asia, and they're kind of cool. There's some species of mountain sheep, in eastern Russia that are quite similar, and Dall sheep are quite similar to stone sheep too. They're very, very closely related. But, some of the high points, they're an all white sheep, although you will see some with some black hair in them. But an all white sheep, they live in, let's say air quotes, suitable alpine terrain in Alaska. So basically above timberline, which is kind of low in Alaska. A lot of places it's like 2,000 feet or so, and above that. But you'll see them in the 3,000 to 7,000 foot range, in mountain ranges that, in areas of mountain ranges that get real wind blown. They're not everywhere. Sometimes you'll look at mountains and think it looks like great sheep country and they're just not there. But so they're, sheep, they're like a bighorn, but they're a thin horn species of sheep. So they're smaller, their body size is smaller and their horns are thinner, but they have kind of the same look. A lot of people would say, oh, that's a bighorn, but there's some differences.
Okay.
They, like a big mature ram will probably weigh around 200 pounds. Some of them I'm sure get a little bigger than that. Some of them maybe a little less. And then the ewes, I think, are about half that size. So they pretty much inhabit every suitable terrain, in the state. They're found in a bunch of, 7 major mountain ranges and in also smaller little mountain ranges and spots that are suitable. Sometimes they end up in weird spots and are more sparsely populated there. But, that's basically it. They, I think I read or heard that the guy that discovered, or they're named after, Dall that they're named after, never even actually maybe saw one. I think he was an explorer or whatever on the Yukon River and saw some horns or parts and pieces in a village or something that they had gotten. But that was pretty interesting. But I'm kind of just going off what I've read on there. So I don't know. They're that's I'm just kind of talking in circles. It's pretty simple. Just Alaska's native sheep species.
Yep. I can see some on the wall behind you. They're white, just like you say they are. And just even for a guy like me that doesn't know hardly anything about hunting sheep, just eyeballing it, it looks like their horns are significantly thinner than is the case with a bighorn sheep, which is why they're a thin horn sheep and a bighorn is a bighorn sheep. It is that simple then.
Yeah, around the bases of a Dall sheep, if you just were to pull a string, wrap a string around the base of the horns where they come out of their head, they're like 13 and a half. If you get over 14-inch bases, it's getting to be a really heavy horn sheep. Whereas a bighorn, I mean, I haven't had my hands on a lot of bighorns, but a bighorn is much, much bigger. And for the same length, because I this gets into sheep judging, but looking at pictures of bighorns people have harvested before, I held a couple of them in my hands. People would say, "Oh, that's a 40-inch ram," meaning his horn is 40 inches long from the base to the tip. I wouldn't believe them. I'd say there's no way, but yeah, they truly are like just a much bigger, scaled up version. It's like one of those. Whatever species of argali you want to pick, sheep compared to a bighorn, they're just that much bigger. Aside from that, they are very similar though. The horns look similar. They're kind of constructed similar. The growth rings are similar. But yeah, just scaled down.
Now, a Dall sheep are one of those animals that residents do not need a guide to hunt, but non-residents do. Is that correct? Unless you're hunting with a family member?
Yep, that's correct. In Alaska, you have to have, a non-resident either has to hire an outfitter or hunt with what they call second degree of kin, and they lay that out. It's like it's not cousin or uncle. It's brother or sister or spouse or in-law. Or brother or sister, father-in-law.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Now, you talked a minute ago about the deal with determining a legal ram. That's another story I hear all the time. You got guys up there, they get on some sheep and they're like, gosh, we got a shot at it, but man, I don't know if this sheep is legal or not. And so it seems like, one, the penalty for shooting an illegal ram is very high. And there are a lot of cases where it's borderline. Unless you really know what the heck you're doing, it can be hard to judge. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. It's so a ram can be under the vast majority of areas in Alaska. The management they call it like a full curl management strategy. So under that, a ram can be legal to shoot 3 different ways. First, he can be full curl, which it's kind of a nuanced subject. There's some give and take because and the way it was always explained in the regulations was kind of vague, and the diagram they gave was like, most sheep didn't grow exactly like that. So the nuts and bolts of it is the horn has to grow from the base all the way around. His horn has to completely go through 360 degrees of a circle is the most basic definition. And there's some sheep that just don't grow. Like some sheep will never be full curl their entire life just because of how their horns grow. And there's a couple different methods that Alaska Fish and Game has a whole pretty helpful booklet on 3 different methods to determine whether something's full curl or not. I'm trying to filter out what's relevant and what, because I'm the type of person that'll just dive off into the weeds really bad. Mm-hmm. So, full curl essentially growing through 360 degrees of a circle, so if you look at it from the side or basically from the side where the horn makes a perfect circle, not any lips, you want that horn tip to come all the way back to the base or above it.
Okay.
One other way is if it's double broomed, which means that both of the horn tips have been broken off and the lamb tips don't exist on the horn anymore, because they'll grow small, thin lamb tips their first year of life. And then after their first year of life, they grow a little bit more and more and more. But if it's not uncommon for sheep to break one or both of their horn tips off, and because in theory that makes it impossible to judge whether it's full curl, If both tips are broken off, then they're double broomed and legal. And I've shot several of those too. But
Is that sheep that's over your right shoulder? Is that a broomed ram? Other side.
let's see.
Yeah.
This one,
Yeah.
that one's double broomed.
Okay.
Yes. And I don't think I have any just skulls that are. No, the last three I've got all have their tips, but I've gotten a few double broomed rams. And then the third way is age. So the whole purpose of the full curl regulation or management strategy is to preserve some of the older class of rams in the population, because and there's been a lot of studies done over the years as you know, Alaska became a state and actually started getting some management, and there was a lot of trial and error and study in these sheep populations. And it's important for sheep to have some of the older class of rams in place that are dominant and do like the majority of the breeding. When there's none of them left, or very, very, very few, younger rams take over more of the breeding, and they end up having a slightly higher mortality. So it's just tougher for the population for the numbers of rams to stay high. But so at 8 years old is like kind of that maturity level where they tick over. For one, it's where they tick over and start becoming dominant and do most of the breeding. But it also is kind of a tipping point. Like once a ram gets to 8 years old, he's kind of living on borrowed time. It's not uncommon to see him to be 9 or 10 or sometimes 11 years old, but once they tip over 8 years old, their mortality increases significantly anyway. So under that management strategy, you're just taking the excess, the kind of the cream off the top, and it results in, like, I think less than 1% of the harvest, population harvested. It's really pretty minimal. Mm-hmm. But to determine if a ram is 8 years old is not the easiest thing always. You do it by counting the growth rings on their horn. And some rams it's easy, some rams it's almost impossible, and a lot of rams are somewhere in between. And so that is one way. And I have shot a few lit rams on basing, primarily on age, if I couldn't get a look at the full curl. But I could tell for sure that it was a mature, like over 8-year-old ram. Then I'd do it. It's not really recommended, but it is a legal way.
Mm-hmm. I mean, is that kind of a nerve-wracking deal where you shoot a ram and you have to go up to it and like, oh man, I really hope I did this right. I really hope I counted those growth rings. Or these actually full curl?
It's always stressful. In fact, there's a few rams I've killed that are like, I call them one lookers, like easy one look. You don't even have to see them from the side, and 100% that they're full curl. I even get stressed out about those, because then you start thinking, man, I hope I did actually shoot the right one. Because they're often in a group. But that's kind of minor. But yeah, it is. It's because it's a gut check. The last thing you ever want to do is walk up on a sheep and have him not be what you thought he was, which it happens. It's easy. It's such hard work and takes so much time and effort that when you get into a shooting position on sheep, you haven't been seeing many sheep, like people will talk themselves into shooting rams that they should not be shooting. Mm-hmm. Sometimes even then you get a little lucky and it ends up being legal. But for me, I mean, I don't shoot them unless I know they're legal, and I still get nervous about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now you have to check all your rams with Alaska Fish and Game after the hunt. Is that right?
Yep. You're required to bring them in and get them sealed. They put they drill a hole and punch a little aluminum plug in there, which is kind of still a sore spot for me. I don't like that. I think it's a good thing to bring them in and have them have them sealed and certified. I just don't like their sealing method, but that's another story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, fair enough. And I'll bet that could be a stressful experience there too. I mean, because it sounds like some of this stuff can be a little bit subjective on who is looking at the sheep and judging it. Or is it pretty straightforward that if you get this this head on the ground in front of you, it's cut and dry if it's legal or not.
Yeah, it's not always straightforward for sure. Aging, is a little bit interpretive. I mean, I don't think that it's as interpretive as some do, but you're always going to have someone in the room that thinks it's something else that doesn't agree. So I think in most cases it's not that big a deal, but there are some sheep I've seen where, there's four people in the room and five different answers
Oh, geez.
as to how it goes. Well, then I'll pull off this ram if I can reach it without tearing my bum shoulder. This ram I killed last year. I never actually got like a really good side look at him. He has it's kind of hard to see, but you see how his tips like kick out on the sides. Mm-hmm. So and when we got in position on him, we knew one of the other rams in the group we were going to shoot, and we had seen this guy the night before, but had from a couple miles away. And so we weren't really sure, but I was, I counted rings on him, and I had one sitting next to him that I could count and could tell like 100% was a 7-year-old ram. And this one I knew was going to be at least 8 based on just his maturity and how he looked compared to that one I knew was 7. And I could see the rings too. So I'm using like multiple factors. Mm-hmm. But he, like, arguably it's kind of hard to see just because he grows so funky. There's ways where you could say like he's full curl right there. But is that really looking at him properly? Like, some people would not call this ram full curl. I think he's like right on the line, but he's a mature 9-year-old sheep and like actually a pretty big sheep. Not huge, but he is one of the bigger sheep I've killed. So that's just an example. So it can be very subjective. I think, the idea kind of came up this winter. I think I'm going to start pulling like lower incisor teeth and just having my rams send them off to have them aged. Mm-hmm. And I think frankly that would probably be a good idea for Fish and Game too, because then there's been like people go to court over a ram that they say is legal or they say is 8, and Fish and Game says it's 7, and usually Fish and Game's right.
Yeah.
But it would settle a lot of disputes, I think, if you could just tooth age them, or if they required you to just bring a tooth out.
And so the thing that was 100% legal about that particular ram was that he was clearly 9 years old.
Yep, yeah, clearly 9 years old. Yep.
Okay. And you only need one of them. So with all of this, the idea is to incentivize the harvest of older, more mature rams. And so as a ram gets older, his bases get thicker, and then the curls get longer. Is that right?
Yep.
But as he gets older, you have the possibility, or the odds increase that he's going to broom one or both of his horn tips too, right?
Yeah, sometimes. It's not. I think every sheep is a little different. Mm. Some sheep will broom pretty young, and sometimes you'll find really old sheep. I think it just depends on the attitude. A lot of times I'm sure they break them fighting. Mm-hmm. Some sheep, I think it bothers them and they'll just break them off. I've seen them like rubbing and raking them on rocks. If it's a sheep that horn coming into his line of vision bothers him or something, I don't really know, but it just seems like some of them broom and some of them never do.
Would it be accurate to say that in general, a sheep will get bigger and quote unquote score better as he gets older?
In general, yes, but it has way more to do with the genetics. I think, Joel, genetics and living conditions and weather that they get during their lifetime. It's kind of just a soup of different factors that contribute to creating like big rams. And, some of the guys that are even quite a bit more serious about it than I am, call them super rams. It takes genetics as much as anything, because they'll observe that some of these rams that end up being really big rams are really big rams by the time they're 7 years old, or 6 years old sometimes. And, some of the rams I've killed, just hunting in areas that may not have the best genetics. There's this one I just showed you is a 9-year-old ram.
Okay.
I've got the one on the wall that I won't reach and grab. He's a 10-year-old ram and significantly smaller, like smaller base. He's a nice full curl, but smaller bases, shorter horns. So yeah, genetics has the most to do with it. And then if you get the right genetics, line up with the right weather stretch that ram gets during his lifetime, and nothing eats him, then
he lives long enough and all that.
One.
Yeah.
But their horns do keep growing. If they don't get large amounts of growth in their first few years, it's hard for them to ever catch up.
So that 10-year-old ram, even though he wasn't bigger than your 9-year-old ram, that 10-year-old ram was bigger at 10 than he was at 9 and at 8 and all of that.
Yeah. Yep, exactly.
So what is a quote-unquote trophy ram? I hear 40 inches thrown around a lot on that. Tell us a little bit about that.
I would say that overall, a trophy ram is like any legal ram that you can get off the mountain, because it's not easy. People throw around those numbers in. 40-inch rams don't just grow on every bush. They're not nearly as common. I've seen a handful of them in 20 years of sheep hunting, and part of that has to do with hunting the spots I've been hunting. You're not going to see one if there's not any 40-inch rams in that country. I have yet to kill one. I've killed high 30s, been pretty close, but never quite broke that. So that's kind of what most of us sheep hunters in Alaska anyway that I run around with are, the 40 inch is kind of like the golden, like killing a 70-inch moose or a 30-inch wide mule deer. It's just one metric, and there's, but that's kind of the number everybody focuses on. It seems like
that's like a 400-inch elk. Or is it easier or harder than that?
Yeah, I don't know what. Yeah, probably something like that. Although, and there are some, guys that kill bigger sheep than I do that actually do like score them and like 170, 70-inch or 172-inch rams makes Boone and Crockett, and those are like exceedingly rare. It's really, really, really tough to find a Boone and Crockett sheep. So they're very special, but on average for the average sheep hunter, you get a 40-inch ram. That's something pretty special.
Yeah, and like you said, it seems like especially. We'll talk about the actual hunt here in a second, but it seems like just the act of finding one that is legal and getting to kill it, recover it, and get it out of there. Like you said, that seems like the real hard thing to do. Just doing that is hard enough. Never mind getting one that is a Boone and Crockett.
Yeah, exactly.
So tell us a little bit about how the heck you actually hunt sheep. What's the process like? That sort of thing.
Yeah, the biggest thing about sheep, logistics is huge for sheep hunting, especially here in Alaska. The first component is getting to where you're going to hunt, and that can be very difficult in itself. I've done pretty much every way you could go about it. I've hiked in from a road. A lot of times I've taken a 4-wheeler and ridden in and then hiked from there. And I've flown in with in an airplane quite a few times too to start hunting. And one of the big, whether it's a misconception, the areas I've hunted, you're gonna typically go a long ways from where you get dropped off. A couple times I've been lucky enough to where you start seeing sheep right where you kind of launch, where you get off and take off, but seems pretty rare. It seems like more often than not you got to do a lot of hiking and cover a lot of country just to get to the areas where you're going to start seeing rams and actively hunting. So that's those are kind of the main three ways. Either you walk from the road, you take an ATV, in on a trail to get to a spot where you can start hiking, or you get dropped off with an airplane on an airstrip or gravel bar somewhere. Um, and then the next aspect is kind of, just walking and getting to where you're going to hunt and start glassing. And it's a lot of walking, usually a lot of long distance stuff. Just, it's not like the crazy mountain athlete sprint, run around everywhere, climb every hill type of thing. I'm pretty slow, so I just take it slow and get to spots and spend a lot of time glassing, like more time than I think I should glassing. It's sheep are kind of, they have feeding patterns throughout the day. They're up, like any other animal, they're up feeding in the morning, in the evening, and depending on the weather and what you're dealing with, I like to look at, if I see like a big area or a good glassing spot where I'm expecting to see some sheep, I like to give it a couple feeding cycles, like a whole day, before really moving on to kind of see, because you'd think that a white sheep would be always easy to see in the mountains, like you could never miss them, but you can miss them pretty easily. There's so many times I've sat watching a canyon all day, and then at 8 o'clock at night, all of a sudden sheep start popping out everywhere, or you just happen to look and see a band of them cutting across a spot that you couldn't see, or coming out of a cut that you couldn't see into, and they're only in sight for a minute or two, and you got to try to get an idea of what's there really, really quick. But you're basically just hiking and glassing a lot until you find a ram you're at after, or you want to hunt. And then it gets pretty exciting. You try to plant a stock, and then hopefully, once you kill them, it's all the mind game is over. It's a lot less stressful once you kill them. And then it's just hard. Then it's just hard work. But it's one of the things I like about it. It's challenging and it's very stressful, to a degree. It's fun. You're out hunting, but you're making big, there's a lot weighing on all the decisions you make, whether you burn a day going up this canyon or that, or, you've got one more canyon to go up here, which was kind of like the hunt last year. We'd probably walked 25 miles, like up these canyons, hunting them all the way out and coming back to where our camp was. There was one more that we just decided to turn around and leave and go to a different spot. But it's, you got to weigh, do we want to spend a whole nother day checking this spot versus going somewhere else? And sometimes it pays off and sometimes it doesn't. So it's
what time of year is sheep hunting season up there?
Sheep season starts August 10th. And is the general season starts August 10th and lasts till September 20th. And most people are going to go like the opening first couple weeks of the season, and that includes me. Sometimes the hunting can be really good in September, but you're getting exponentially colder, and depending if you're hunting in some of the more northern regions, air transport can get a little more sketchy later in the year. You're almost certain to get some snow, but you can get, we've gotten 6 inches of snow on August 10th before. Jeez. At several times and in several places. But yeah, so most people hunt the early season. I've had a couple like really fun hunts later. One ram I killed September 12th, I think it was. And that was a lot of fun. Pretty much everybody's burned out by that point. So if you want to like go and not see as many people, you let everyone get it out of their system in the opener and then go late.
Now, are these tags, are they a mix of draw tags and over-the-counter tags for residents, or what?
Yeah, there's a mix. I've killed most of my sheep on just over-the-counter. They call them general harvest tickets. But there are a number of draw areas, and I killed one ram in a draw area, and 2 years ago my hunting partner and I party drew tags for another area, and we won't be putting in for that again. It's a area that has good genetics, but we walked like 80 miles and we just weren't in where the sheep were at that time. It's kind of a tough area to hunt. So, it was fun.
If you're hunting
type
in
2 fun.
August, September up there, are you still dealing with absurdly long days, lots and lots of daylight?
Yeah, and it changes fast though. So most area, I mean, down south, you're getting some dark still on the opener, like a little bit of dark. Um, yeah, like the Alaska range in north, it's not really getting fully dark. It gets pretty dark, but I mean, yeah, you're dealing with long, long, long days. And even, even to the end of the season in September, I guess you're dealing with, what's the daylight? 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. long days, even at the end of the season, roughly. And it's kind of which you bring that up, it kind of makes, you have to make some decisions on how you're going to hunt. The traditional way is you get up early in the morning and,
Mm-hmm.
You try to burn the candle at both ends, but you just really can't always do that. So my hunting partner and I typically just will get up sometimes if we're excited, we'll get up early and we happen to wake up, we'll get up early and do some glassing. But we're not getting up at like 4 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning. We kind of get up when we get up and then we hunt as late as we have to. If we're seeing rams, we'll put a stock on them at 10, 11 o'clock in the evening, shoot them at some places you can shoot them at midnight,
Ooh, yeah.
on the opener. I think I've shot the earliest ram I've killed was at 3 a.m. on opening morning. So like we were sitting on them in the fog at midnight. So
when you and I talked about your bear hunt last year, do I remember right that you said for big game, there's no legal shooting hours in Alaska? Is that right?
Yep, that's correct.
So as long as it's light enough that you can see the animal, you can do it. So you could have legally, maybe not practically, but legally shot that ram at 12:01 on opening morning.
Yep, and that's not uncommon for, I haven't done it that early myself, but I know quite a few guys they've been in there before the season and they find their sheep and put a stock on them, because usually at night those sheep will be pretty stationary, and if you can get a spot where they won't wind you with thermals, you can get above them or kind of in a position where you can shoot them at midnight. And that is very realistic and mostly in the Brooks range early in the season. I think, in the Alaska range or any, more southern regions, it's just a little too dark.
Mm-hmm.
But you could be sitting there until it gets light enough to see them for sure.
Now, I haven't done too much mountain hunting really for anything. I've been on one hunt. I went to New Zealand, shot a nice tar on that hunt. And in that hunt, the guide, we found him from below, got above the rams, and then put a stalk on them that way. Is that a common thing to do with sheep too?
Yeah, it really is. Because a lot of a lot of mountain game looks down for danger. They're used to danger being below them. That's like their primary defense is their vision, and they position themselves as most of the predators are going to be below them. So they don't look up nearly as often as you can get busted above them, but they don't look up nearly as often as they do look down. So that's, if there's like a cookie cutter strategy for stalking sheep, it's, find them, don't let them see you, because they can see you from a long, long, long ways away, and get out of sight and get above them and stalk them like that.
So can you talk a little bit about the process? So you spot the sheep from a long way away, glassing, looks like a good ram, it's worth investigating sooner or in more detail. Can you talk a little bit more about the process of really closing the distance like that, some of the strategies that you take to get above them without being seen, get within shooting range, that sort of thing?
Yeah, basically you're just using the terrain to your advantage. Even on a big, kind of wide open hillside, sometimes there is nothing you can do. Sometimes you just have to wait for them to put themselves in a spot that you can get close to them. Mm-hmm. But the basic strategy is going to be to kind of let's see. And I guess I'm kind of leaving out evaluating a ram to make sure it's one you want to kill, because usually that's like the final. You find a ram that looks good and you want to get close enough to make sure he's good. A bigger ram that you can tell sometimes from a mile or more away that they're legal. That's not so much the issue, but most rams are much closer than that. So you want, I like to get a good look at them from within 1,000 yards. So, the initial, when I see, you see a ram that has good potential, you try to figure out how to get out of sight and use the terrain and, keeping the wind in mind, because they will smell you too. Get to a spot, either, sometimes it is in shooting range, but if you can get to the closest spot, maybe, under between 500 and 1,000 yards, where you can look at them again and the light's good and just evaluate that they're legal, then, you kind of back off and use the terrain to stay out of sight and kind of climb up. Sometimes it's on the same mountainside, but you're taking this canyon over here up to get around them. Sometimes you might have to loop around the back of the mountain and go over the top, or sometimes, I have successfully stalked sheep from below, but you just have to be a lot more careful. Whatever you're doing, you're just using that terrain to keep yourself out of sight.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's not to make it sound super complicated, because it's usually not. I think if you're paying attention to the way what the wind and thermals are doing and the terrain, that's just the basics of it.
So looking just at these sheep on the wall behind you, their ears are not physically very big. They're much smaller relative to their body than, say, a deer or an elk's ear is. And so is it reasonable to assume that you talk about their eyesight just being fantastic? Nose is pretty good. You catch you on the thermal, they'll wind you like that. They will hear you if you are careless or you're making really non-natural noises, but being super quiet is not something that is important as staying out of sight, staying out of the wind.
Yeah, I would say definitely not as important as staying out of or keeping them from smelling you and staying out of sight. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're trying to get real close, or you're bow hunting, or you're in a spot where those sheep will move around, and you're kind of creeping up over the ridge and you expect them to be below you, you do want to be quiet, because they may or may not hear you. Sometimes just the way the wind is blowing, or whatever's happening. And a lot of times even like rocks clattering or whatever, that won't even get their attention sometimes, because they hear it all the time. But, in case, it pays to be quiet and sneaky in case you get way too close to them, because we have had that happen too, where you get way closer than you wanted to be. and that sound may not spook them, but if it gets their attention and they spot you and they bust you, you're in trouble. So yeah.
What is a typical shooting ranges that you're dealing with when you actually get into range to take a shot on one of these sheep?
I would say most commonly like 200 to 300 yards.
So not that far then.
No, not that far. The farthest one I've ever shot was 465, and that was we didn't expect that ram to be where he was. We were climbing. They ended up being straight up above us on the ridge we were going up, and bedded down. And that was as close as we could get comfortably without them spotting us. And he was laid out in a good position, and there was no wind, and it was just a shot I felt really comfortable with. So there wasn't really much need to get closer. The next farthest one was like 420. And that one, that was a long time ago, but that was across a canyon. Mm-hmm. Other than that, I think they've all been under 300 yards, usually between 200 and 300. You can get closer, and I've had a couple that are under 100 yards, but there's not really, if you're rifle hunting, you're taking more risk than you need to. Mm-hmm. If you can get into a good shooting position at 200 or 300 yards, for most people, that's not a bad shot to take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How common is it to deal with very windy conditions when you're shooting out there?
It's really common. And that for me, that contributes to not shooting as far, typically, or I say typically, I have never really shot what a lot of people consider long range at a sheep. And the wind can do some really weird things. Sometimes it looks like it's doing one thing and really doing something else. And if it's it's been windy enough a lot of times that I wouldn't shoot 300 yards. Mm-hmm. you're getting 20, 30 mile an hour winds sometimes. And a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, there was a ram sat literally across a canyon from this ram all day at like 600 to 800 yards. That maybe with like a little different setup, but I would be comfortable shooting that. But at the time with the rifle we had with us, it just was not worth the risk. And typically, if you're just patient, it'll work out. You're patient and, just keep an eye on this sheep from day to day. He'll do something that lets you get close to him. Mm-hmm. But, yeah.
So you're dealing in areas out here where sometimes you're on an over-the-counter tag. Is it a possibility that you could have another hunter go out there and get in front of you with these sheep or unintentionally scare them away or something like that? Has that ever happened to you?
That stuff hasn't happened to me a whole lot. I've had a couple little incidents. Some people, I don't know whether it's bad luck or just if they're hunting in more highly pressured areas, but that stuff does happen sometimes. Yeah. You can, so there can be a little bit of pressure to maybe kind of push it a little bit on the shots you take, or push it on stalks when you should just be patient and wait. Usually I try to just end up being patient, and whatever happens. You can only control so much, but yeah, I just really don't want, and hopefully it never will. I just don't want bad things to happen that can result from pushing beyond what you're really comfortable with or what you should be doing.
Now, do I recall right that you shot your grizzly with a Winchester XBR 6.5 Creedmoor, that you've also used that same rifle on some sheep hunts too?
Yeah, that was actually the rifle I shot that sheep at 465 with.
Okay. All right.
So I killed that sheep. I killed one other sheep with that rifle. And altogether, I think that rifle's killed 7 sheep. And then, and a bunch of other stuff too. But yeah.
So it seems like you really like the 6.5 Creedmoor, especially for that sort of hunting then.
Yeah, it works great for me. I started, I was competitive shooting NRA high power when the 6.5 Creedmoor came out, and so it was kind of on my radar back then, and I was hunting sheep back then too, so I kind of had my eye open for hunting rifles chambered in it, because I was like, oh, that sounds like it would be shooting a 25-06 at the time, which is an excellent sheep gun too. But I mean, always looking to try something new, and had my eye on that. And I got, when Ruger was one of the first companies to bring a production hunting rifle, M77, out in 6.5 Creedmoor. So I got one like 2011 was the first ones that came out. And I got one of those, shot some blacktail deer with it, and then took it sheep hunting the next year and shot a sheep with it. And I think I ended up selling it. One of my buddies wanted it, so sold it to him and moved on. And then the Creedmoor blew up later on. And yeah, it's an excellent sheep gun. Does good in the wind. It doesn't weigh a lot, doesn't kick a lot. Seems to do really well on sheep. I mean, you shoot them and they fall on their face.
Now,
pretty much. So
I've heard anecdotally that Dall sheep in particular are not very tough animals. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, that's been my experience. Sometimes they don't always just flop instantly, but if you get a good hit on them, they don't go very far. They don't ever go very far. They may walk a few feet and fall over, but it's just not, once they're shot, they're not very flighty, unless you really clip a leg or something, then that's not really probably the case. But, I haven't done that yet. Thank goodness. But yeah, no, they're not that tough to kill. And I mean, shoot that shot at 465, bullet went all the way through the sheep still. So, it's got plenty of juice. And
this seems like a perfect situation either for a burger bullet of one kind or another, or that ELDX bullet.
Yeah. I mean, I've been using that ELDX for pretty much, I don't know that I've ever shot a sheep with anything but an ELDX in a 6.5, actually. I don't think I have. It's just a phenomenally performing bullet. I mean, even up close, it seems to do really well. I've never had the mysterious blow ups that people talk about, and I've shot a lot of stuff with them. In a lot of calibers. So yeah, I mean that's definitely my favorite hunting bullet in a 6.5.
So besides the 6.5 Creedmoor, what else have you taken sheep with?
My first one was a 30-06. Then I killed a bunch with a 25-06. I killed one with a 280 improved. I killed 6.5, then I killed one 6.5. So that and some others. And I have a kind of a custom Remington 700 built with a it's a 280 actively improved neck down to 270 that I've killed a few sheep with. It's a pretty cool gun. I don't think we quite got like what we were hoping to velocity wise out of it, but it is a little faster than a regular 270.
So what are you getting out of it?
Oh, what was it, like 3,100 with a 130 or 32 maybe 3,150, something like that.
Yeah, it's
been so long that since I actually did any loading with that poor thing's been sitting in the safe for a while. But and that's that really light rifle is not a high volume rifle, so I the ammo I have for it's been loaded for about 10 years.
Well, what are you thinking that you're going to take out for sheep this year?
I don't know what rifle yet, but I'm going to take a 6.5 this year.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm probably going to take a 6.5 moose hunting too.
What?
Just to do it.
About how much does that XPR weigh when it's fully loaded and when you're actually carrying it afield?
It's probably like 7.5 pounds or so. Like it's not an ultralight rifle by any means, but it's not terribly heavy for like a good budget rifle that's kind of a do-all. I really like the XPR. I've got one of Browning's new X-Bolt 2s with the carbon barrel and the Macmillan stock that's a foam core carbon fiber. And that gun it can't, I think the production ones are going to come with pick rails. This one came without, and I just used the tally like lightweight rings. And that gun naked is less than 6 pounds. And so if I'm planning on taking a suppressor sheep hunting this year for the first time too, because I've got a couple of the titanium ones, like that Silencer Coast side that weighs like, I think right at 8 ounces. And so with that, if I take that rifle, 5 3/4 pounds plus half a pound suppressor and a lightweight scope, it's not going to be very heavy. But there's a lot of cool options out there for, lightweight sheep rifles.
Yeah, I know. It seems like we're doing a whole lot better than that when compared to what Jack O'Connor was dealing with way back in the day. Got a whole lot more options right now.
Yeah, options, and just like as nice as the Woodstock blued rifles are to look at, like in that environment, they work if you take care, but they're just a lot more high maintenance, and they are not nearly as high performance. No matter what anybody says, they're just not on the same level as some of these, like this Browning, for example. It's a sub 6 pound gun that is, it's phenomenally accurate. And I'm not saying like shoot a couple 3-shot groups under half an inch. It's like shooting 30 shot group aggregates under 3/4 of an inch.
Ooh,
that type of thing with certain types of ammo. But the accuracy and performance as so many of these guns is just very impressive. We've got lots of options. But the nice thing is, like that XPR, if someone doesn't want to shell out for like a really high end gun, those guns work fine too. They're just a little heavier.
What kind of scope do you have on it?
Most of that on that XPR, I have a Leupold VX2 2-7 by 33. That's kind of the scope I've used most for sheep hunting. I really like it. Some of the newer, is it the VX3 HDs that are really light? They have like a 3.5 to 10 that's basically the same weight as the 2-7s. I wouldn't ever go higher than a 10 power on a sheep hunting scope. It's just not necessary for any reasonable distance you're going to be shooting. Like it's just extra weight. It doesn't pay, in my opinion.
So you'll go with lower magnification in exchange for having a smaller, lighter scope. Keep your whole weight package down then a little bit.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, it makes sense. That is So I have Christensen Arms Ridgeline FFT and 7 PRC, and fully loaded, that thing is under 8 pounds with a suppressor on it, with a banished backcountry
Nice.
on it. But it has a VX5 HD scope on it, and I've always said that if I were going to go sheep hunting or something, I would probably bump down to a VX3 and just go a little bit lighter with it.
Yeah, and that's a pretty good shooting rifle too. I had one, I reviewed one and took it sheep hunting. I didn't ever get to shoot a sheep with it, but in 308, and that was a cool, really light little rifle.
Mm-hmm. Since mine's 7 PRC, it's a standard length action. So if I went 6.5
Yep.
PRC or 6.5 Creedmoor, I could, get it even a little smaller and a little lighter.
Yep. Yep.
What other cartridges are real popular among other sheep hunters up there, have you found? Guys that you know?
Yeah, stuff like that. I mean, the 270 is still really popular, and that's still a really good sheep round. Uh, I don't know. I'm trying to think of any like strong trends, because there's some guys that'll take 300s.
Now, the guys that take a 300,
243s.
are they sort of like a one gun for everything sort of guy? They take that same gun?
Probably most of the time, yeah.
Yeah.
Or you got the 30-06 guys. They're taking, they're just their hunting rifle, rather than custom type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But like 6.5 PRC is getting more popular, and that's an excellent choice. I think 7 PRC is going to be an excellent one too. It's hard to say. It's hard to discount any of them, because they're all good options. And it's one thing, like, I have trouble because I drift way into the nerdy side of things. That when you take that dive, you got to remind people that, like, look, these like older cartridges do still work fine.
Mm-hmm.
But the newer ones do offer some tangible benefits. For a sheep hunter, a lot of it's the short action, lighter gun, better inherent accuracy, across the board, and shorter little cartridges that are more efficient. That are going to cut the wind better.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of hedges your bets. It doesn't mean that the older stuff can work. I mean, my first sheep I killed with a Remington 710 and 30-06. So.
Oh, whatever works, man. And like you said, though, the developments that have come along with these cool new cartridges have also really helped some of those older legacy cartridges. You got better bullets and all of that stuff that you could put in that old 270 or 30-06 now than was the case even 20 years ago.
Yep. No, and and I try not to. I don't really necessarily argue that anybody should switch if they like, if you like your 30-06 or you really like your 300 Win Mag, then keep using it. It's not necessarily compelling enough to switch unless you're a competitive shooter. But if you're buying your first one, or you are wanting to buy a new rifle, there's like a payoff for picking some of these newer cartridges over some of the older ones. They do offer some advantages if you're picking your first sheep rifle or wanting to buy a new sheep rifle.
Yeah, I can see what you mean with that. Well, so we talk about shooting a sheep, talk about how usually you make a good hit on them. They don't go very far. What is the process like getting the sheep out of the mountains? I've heard Alaska is very strict on the amount of meat that you have to salvage, all of that stuff. And then you're way back there in the backcountry carrying everything on your back. You got to get all the stuff out on your back, usually in one trip, right?
Yeah, I've done a lot of one trips, but I these days I try to do two, either if that's meat and gear. Mm-hmm. Just to say, because it's really tough on your body, and you really risk injury in that country by carrying super heavy packs. But so you get a sheep down. I mean, the biggest thing, you do have to take all the meat. Like, there's no forgiveness there. You got to take all the edible meat. So you'll go, and when I'm hunting with my sheep hunting partner, we got a pretty good system. But and ironically, the last 3 times we've shot sheep together, we've doubled up and shot 2 at a whack. So we've got a pretty good system down. And it's the same if I'm doing it by myself, which I've done too. It's just slower. So I always like shoulder cape them. The last three I haven't got mounted, but I'll like the capes are worth some money.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll always shoulder cape them and then, and start knocking, get the shoulder cape off, knock a leg off and hand it to my buddy. He does the deboning. So once I get to that point, he's busy, but, knock the legs off, kind of just skin the back half off and knock all the meat off one side. I'll do gutless method with sheep because they're easy to move around, easy to do. So, the quarters, back straps, tenderloins, and then I'll like fillet, roll the ribs off and then take the meat off that side of the neck. So I take all the meat off one side of the sheep while he's laying there, then roll him over, skin the cape down that side. So the meat's never like laying on the dirt or the rocks. And, if I'm doing it by myself, I'm placing the legs and stuff on rocks to cool down. Do the same thing, take all the meat off that other side and cut the head off. And then, we're like deboning all the meat. If it keeps better if you have a short hike and you could like leave the meat on the quarters,
Mm-hmm.
it does keep longer like that. And you have a little bit less waste maybe when you trim it up. But, we pretty much debone everything, just take it all off the bone and, put it in game bags, lay it out to cool. And, then I'll usually on site, I like to just cape the head right there on site and cut the lower jaw. I used to take a saw to saw the skull plate off in place, but then someone pointed out to me that I'm carrying this saw in and out when I could just carry like a little bit more weight out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I just, I'll cape the skull, cut the eyes out, cut excess meat off and the lower jaw off and pack them out like that. And, sometimes like this last year, you've got to, depending on what you have with you, how far you are from camp, you got to make the decision on how you're going to go. A lot of times if you're away from camp and your camp set up, you just load the whole sheep in your backpack, all the meat and cape and horns. It's like 80 pounds or so. And then pack it back to camp and then start ferrying gear and meat out from there back out to wherever your transportation is. I've done it in one trip, meat and gear, quite a few times, and it's just not smart.
Yeah.
So,
fall down, hurt your knee out there with the super heavy pack on. You got to hit SOS on your inReach or something.
Yeah, and I've messed up my feet in years, like almost 20 years ago, messed up my feet pretty bad, and I still have lingering like nerve pain issues from that when I'm hunting. But there's you might have to do it in a number of different ways. This year we were actually carrying our whole camp with us, and I mean we still had like more than a week's worth of food with us in our bags, and when we stalked and shot these sheep, and so we ultimately figured that the spot they were in was probably safer from grizzly bears smelling them. So we laid out all the meat and like put a tarp over it to keep rain off and sun off to keep them in the shade. One of those like little pop-up tarps that you can stake out, and packed our camp back down to the river bottom and set our camp and came back the next morning to get the meat, and did it like that. But one way or another, it's all got to go. So you got to figure it out.
Fair enough. So how does Dall Sheep meat taste?
I think it's excellent. I mean, it's right up there with my very favorite meats. I always used to say that it was like bar none my favorite, and in some ways it is. But objectively, I don't know. I mean, I really like moose meat and like Sitka blacktail too. But Dall Sheep is, I don't know how to describe it. It has its own taste. It's kind of a fatty, rich meat. But it's very tender. It's like a really fine grain. So if you do, you backstrap medallions or whatever, almost, I mean, you cut them with a fork. It almost tastes mushy a little bit, where something like, moose meat has a heavier grain structure to it. And I don't know, it just isn't quite as mushy as sheep meat can sometimes be, but it's excellent. I love it.
Okay. Very, very good. Well, we're coming up on an hour of actual recording. I don't want to, I do want to respect your time and not have you on the phone too much longer. Can you talk maybe for just a couple minutes about some of the management concerns that are going on with Dall sheep in Alaska? We don't need to go into a lot of detail because I know you could do a 3-hour podcast just on this, but it seems like they're in a bit of a rough stretch right now.
Yeah, it's sheep numbers are down right now, and as the result of basically really rough winter conditions. Was it between 2020, 2021 and the next one? I think it was those two
back to back. Jeez.
So there was back to back, and not necessarily middle of the winter, all of it, but like really late springs and big snow dumps in late spring when they're just kind of coming out of winter at their weakest. And it ended up killing a lot of sheep in a lot of areas. Some areas that were like the Tok management area, the Eastern Alaska range got just clobbered. And it was like it's a big time trophy management area. And they had to cut they cut their tags. I think the only reason they didn't close it completely for the time being is, because focusing on the old and mature rams isn't going to slow down the recovery, and to keep, because a lot of our concerns with some of the, the federal stuff that's going on is actually getting it restored once the population is in. You can really get into the weeds on some of the theories, and I don't think that hunting them and targeting mature 8-year-old or older rams is going to have any effect. And I don't think it does. It's such a tiny percentage of the population on the recovery. But basically, sheep got clobbered pretty good in a lot of areas those 2 winters, and it's created a lot of kind of, conflict and dispute. The feds have closed some areas up in the Brooks Range that a lot of people, including the state, don't believe should be closed. There's a lot of definitely a lot of politics involved in it. But we're still gonna hunt sheep, and look for. My personal take on it is that I've killed a handful of like 7-year-old rams over the years. Is I just want to make sure that I'm killing like an older than 8-year-old ram.
Yeah. Now, are there, in your lifetime hunting up there, has there ever been any legal hunting for female sheep?
Yeah, there still is in some areas. Like it's not a common thing because it's such a pain. It's like there's subsistence hunts, where you're doing it for the meat, is the idea. And, I could theoretically go do some of those, but logistically it's so tough that it's not worth it. And I know of a few sheep hunters who have gone and done them to target big rams because they can do that too. But no serious sheep hunter ever even really wants to kill a ewe. In the past, like in the early days, there were some targeted ewe hunts that were unsuccessful and like wildly unpopular.
Yeah.
That goes, there's a book on Dall sheep management by one of the guys, Wayne Heimer, that was involved in a lot of that early on studying and referred to, carrying capacity is used in a lot of management. But there's no evidence to suggest that like a lot of the areas in Alaska like are at carrying capacity for sheep. So killing ewes only hurts the population, but that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But yeah, long story short, it's a kind of a sucky time to get into sheep hunting right now. But I think ultimately like sheep hunting is just going to be tougher for a while. I think they'll recover. But it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take some years for everything to bounce back to a good level. The good news is that we, have, especially in specific areas, have had population crashes that are, weather caused like this one, that are just as bad. Were just as bad as this. And, after, 10 whatever years, they bounce back even stronger than before, or have in the past.
Yeah.
And
okay,
even the non-hunted areas like in the national parks and stuff are showing the same kind of slides. So,
well, yeah, that sounds like there's a whole lot. You can really pull that thread and really talk a lot about it. But hopefully, in 8-10 years, The time it takes to grow a big trophy sheep like that, we'll have the situation be much improved in most of Alaska.
Yep. I hope so.
Well, so as we wrap up with sheep hunting, where can people go to learn more about you and the sort of work that you do at Outdoor Life, on Instagram, your podcast, all that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I don't post a lot on Instagram, but my Instagram is just the Tyler Freel, and I have a lot of stories on OutdoorLife.com. A lot of sheep hunting stories, and I try to post kind of news-ish stories on some of these issues as they come up and come out as best I can keep up with them. And then I have a podcast, Tundra Talk podcast. We talk a lot about sheep hunting and this kind of stuff. So.
Okay, well, good deal. Well, Tyler, it was great talking to you today. Thanks a lot for taking the time out of your schedule to have this conversation with me.
Yeah, no problem, John.
Now, Tyler's actually the 6th person I've had on the show talking about sheep hunting. Mark Helsing from the Hunt Backcountry podcast and Exo Mountain Gear was on the show in episode 289 to talk about a Dall sheep hunt. Dan Rowland was on all the way back in episode 92 to talk about a different Dall sheep hunt that he went on. Steve Speck, also from the Hunt Backcountry podcast and the owner of Exo Mountain Gear, talked about his bighorn sheep hunt in episode 168. Joseph Von Benedict was on the show in episode 174 to talk about a different bighorn sheep hunt. And then I had Ron Spomer on in episode 201 to talk about a couple of different bighorn, Dall, and stone sheep hunts he went on in Idaho, Alaska, and Canada. Check out all of those episodes to learn more about sheep hunting. Now, like I've also mentioned, Tyler was on the Big Game Hunting podcast in episode 282 to talk about that grizzly he took in 2023 with his 6.5 Creedmoor. That was an awesome show. Definitely worth listening to. And of course, be sure to check out Tyler's podcast, the Tundra Talk podcast. Check out his Instagram account as well, where you can see photos from some of his mini sheep hunts from over the years. And finally, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you sign up for my email list. To do that, click the link in the show notes or go to huntingguns101.com. Sign up there for my free ebook on the best hunting cartridges. You'll get my free ebook when you do that. Plus, you'll also start to receive the emails I send out every weekday. If you like the podcast, especially episodes like this one with Tyler, you'll love those emails. Make sure you are getting them too by going to huntingguns101.com. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and I can help. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to thebiggamehuntingblog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.
When you work in tech at Cox, you get to do meaningful work every day. You get to be the biker who codes as fast as he rides, crafting advanced tech solutions that transform car buying. Or a guitarist who develops harmonious apps and websites, connecting people to people and businesses, all in real time. A savvy soccer mom running solution sets as passionately as she runs gameplays. Be the super secret keeper, designing cybersecurity systems to protect private data and websites. A planet protector, expanding EV battery life and inventing more ways to build a better future for all. When you work in tech at Cox, you get to do career-defining work that solves the greatest problems of our time. Join us and connect to work that improves lives, including yours. Learn more about our family of businesses at cox.career/tech.